Welcome everyone and happy New Year's. Today we are on Fish Friday number 26 and we have a fish that you possibly have had in your home aquarium. In fact, most of the time I would say you have. Today we are going to be talking about the common pleco. All these other names that you can call them: plecos, algae eater, janitor fish. I mean, these things have a ton of names. Scientific name of the common pleco is Hypostomus plecostomus. Now, they are part of the family Loricariidae, which is the armored catfish family. Armored catfish are very popular. They are the biggest family of catfish in the world, primarily found in South America, and in fact the common pleco is native to tropical and northeastern South America. Think about Brazil, Guineas, your Amazon rainforest sort of things. They've been found elsewhere. They're possibly all over the world, and as many as you know, they are very popular in the aquarium trade. And in fact, that's how most of these have been introduced into the wild, outside of their native range, is actually from aquarium release. Now, I am going to preface this in that the Loricariidae family has so many species that are almost impossible to distinguish for someone who isn't very. I'll just be completely honest, these things are incredibly hard to distinguish. You have your multiple beautiful ones here and there, but I mean, there's just so many of them. There are scientists that literally their entire life is just spent on looking at these fish. So I'm just going to give you what I know about Hypostomus plecostomus. If I show a picture on stream, I'm just assuming that it is a hypostomus. It may not be, could be. I'm just going to give you the best example that I can. Now, your Hypostomus plecostomus is going to be kind of spotted or striped throughout the body. It's going to look a lot of times kind of like this picture, which I know is not the best picture, but it is a very good picture done by a couple of people down in Texas. Actually, this one was collected in Texas. This, I believe, is a Hypostomus, but don't quote me on this. This might be a different Loricariid, but I'm not sure. This one, I want to say, is a Hypostomus. This one I do believe is a Hypostomus, but again, these things are so difficult and there are so many of them. Now, as you can see, they have these spotted spots all throughout the body, including in the fins. But another thing about these, and this is true of, I believe, almost all catfish, they have spined fins. So in their dorsal fin and in their pectoral fins, they are going to have a spine. And what's interesting about catfish is that those spines are not just a sharp pointy stick, they actually have a ball and socket joint. So kind of think of like your shoulder that would lock. So think about, you have your shoulder down at your side and then you raise it up, but it locks into place. It can't go any farther, but it just locks right here. And that's actually how they do. Those spines are primarily for protection, but they have found other uses for them. Now, as you can imagine, these being part of the Loricariidae family, these do have bony plates, and that is their primary source of protection. These things are sitting on the bottom, and these scutes, really hard outer. I don't want to call them shell. They're bone. So I almost think of like a turtle shell, but they're just right under the skin. But things come up and try to get them, and unless you can basically swallow these things whole, they can't really just bite through and take chunks out of them. But it's also really difficult for things to swallow them whole because remember, when they lock out their spines, they're not just like this big of a fish anymore. Now they gotta try and get their mouth around that big of fish with spines coming out the back, coming out the sides and the back. So now it becomes a much larger thing that they have to swallow. And in fact, many things wind up dying by choking on these. I had an aquarium one time where I had an aquatic frog in there. It was not my frog, it was Mrs. Ping frog, and I hated that frog. It tried to swallow a small catfish, a small loricarid. It's not a Plecostomus, but they kind of operate the same. But that frog tried to swallow it, and it choked to death on it. So trust me, I have seen this basically firsthand. Now, the Hypostomus Plecostomus can get very, very big. You know, I'm not gonna say they're giant, they're enormous, but they can be fairly large. These can get up to about 50 centimeters long, which is about 20 inches. So, you know, pretty decent size. You're commonly going to see them full grown at about 28 centimeters. So think about, you know, 12 inches, so about a foot long. Many people actually get surprised at how big they are. They're not just the surprise of how big they get, but people usually get these in aquariums, you know, real small. They go to the pet store and they see one and they get told, oh, it'll clean your tank, it's an algae eater. And so they get it and it's this big and they put it in their aquarium, and this thing goes and hides, and people kind of forget about him. They're like, oh, well, I do have it in there, but I don't know where he is. He hangs out underneath that rock over there. And then these things are very good at surviving. You can almost put them in water and they'll survive. And then all of a sudden, they'll see it one time and it'll be enormous. It'll have grown. And a lot of times people might have them in small, like 2 5-gallon tanks, and they're just absolutely enormous and way too big for the tank. I do have a first account of this. Me and Mrs. Ping, in that big aquarium that I was just talking about, we bought a bristlenose pleco, which is a different species of this. Really interesting pleco. I definitely encourage you to go look at pictures of it. But we put it in an aquarium, and when we got it, I measured it, and it was 38 millimeters, I believe. So, you know, it's 38 millimeters, 3.5 centimeters, basically. But when we sold the tank, due to us having to move, this thing was, I want to say 42 centimeters. Absolutely enormous beast thing. But we only saw it every once in a while. But you can play with lights to try and get them to come out a little earlier in the day so you can see them. So we saw them more commonly than most people see their plecos, but still don't see them much. He found a log that he liked, and he was under there when the lights were out. Now, something about these, and if you have seen these in aquarium before, if they get startled, they dart real quick, finding a hiding spot. They dart over here, they dart over there. The issue with that is when they do get scared, there have been accounts of them actually being startled so much that they'll dash into a tank wall trying to find a hiding place and actually cracking the tank wall, the glass on the aquarium. Because you have to think about it, their entire head is one big bony plate, and if they just smash, if you don't have a nice thick aquarium wall, it will actually crack. So definitely just be on the lookout if you do get one of these. They're incredible to have in an aquarium, especially when you do them right. Just make sure you kind of know what you're getting. Now, as I said, these are nocturnal, both in aquariums and in the wild. These things, in the wild, they definitely do not come out during the day. But at night, they're going to come out, and they're going to come out, and they're going to attach things, kind of like you see here, right here. We're going to go to the mouth, which is one of the interesting things about these. So the mouth is obviously it's a sucker like mouth, but it's not. People kind of think that that's the entire mouth. It's just they hit there and they just kind of suck, and that's actually not the case. What happens is they use that almost like a suction cup and they'll suction onto, usually in the wild, they're going to suction onto rocks and everything. And then they actually have teeth that they scrape. They do nom nom on the glass, yes. And that's because that's what they eat. They will eat algae and small crustaceans. They'll even eat on plants. So don't actually think that these just eat algae. If you have live plants in your aquarium, they will, especially when they get bigger, they will actually kind of scrape the plant. So you need to be careful on that. Make sure that you have enough plants that they can kind of gnaw on them without killing your plants off. Yes, the penguin is exactly right. Their molars in the which would be called their pharyngeal teeth, which is basically throat teeth. They are incredibly small, but they really grind. They really fit together and grind very well, and that's because the primary diet of these, even though I said they're going to eat plants, they're going to eat the little crustaceans in the algae and everything. They are primarily eating algae, which is they really go after the they really need those pharyngeal teeth to really grind and break those hard cell walls. Because even though algae is, an underwater plant, it still has tough cell walls in them that not necessarily all of them do, and they got to grind up, get all that plant material to make it easily digestible. Because that is one thing about herbivorous animals. You think about your cattle and things like that. The reason why cattle have a rumen or an ovomasum, which is a they have their multiple stomachs, is because so that they can continually digest plant matter, because plant matter in and of itself is extremely hard to digest. And so that is why they have to use these really fine but extremely efficient molars, the pharyngeal teeth, to grind that algae up to make it as easily readily available as they can. Now, going on to their reproduction. These things are actually they are cavity builders. And not only that, they're nest garters. That's, we've been talking about fishing, 26 weeks, if you can imagine that. 26 weeks. And I've talked about multiple fish that have guarded their young. I just wanted to make very clear that is not usually the case. It's just your kind of more interesting fish out there are garters, nest garters, or young garters. There's a difference. There's young guarding and there's nest guarding. A lot of fish will nest guard, very few of them will young guard. But so what happens is a male will go up into a loose riverbank, primarily with mud and everything like that. They will dig out a cavity, and they'll go in about I want to say about half a foot, and then they'll make branches off of that. So kind of think of like an underwater gopher hole. Let's be honest, it's an underwater gopher hole. And then a female will come and lay her eggs in those different arms, and sometimes it'll be multiple females will lay eggs in these. And then the male will actually sit there and make sure that these eggs are protected. Now, here's the issue. We're going to get into the issues with this fish. As you remember, I said that these are very popular in aquariums, but they've been found many places outside of their native home range. And the reason why is usually from aquarium releases. The reason why these get released is usually because they have gotten too big. The issue is when they have gotten too big for an aquarium and they're released into the wild, they have actually gotten too big for most of the native fish to actually eat on these. So, it's really difficult. So these things get released in the wild, but because these have such a wide range of tolerances, they don't need a very specific set of water chemistry to be able to survive. They can survive a broad range of conditions. Cold water, warm water. They do better in warm water, but they can get to basically freezing water and survive. Not the entire year, don't get me wrong. don't take that into account, but water can get cold and they will survive. So these things get released and they are still on their biological clock. So they get released, they're going to go eat, they're going to try to make cavities. And I have the best example I can think of like the problem of these, and we can go into a lot of other issues, but one of the biggest issues in Texas, the hill country, one of the biggest issues, do not think it's the only one, is that these things actually cause incredible erosion problems. Because you think about, like I was saying, they're cavity builders for the nest. So they're going in and they're digging out a cavity, a gopher hole for that. Well, when you get a bunch of them, they do a lot of gopher holes, which causes the banks to fall off. It's causing a lot of erosion, which causes a lot of sedimentation. And in the hill country, which is where I am from, of Texas, sedimentation is actually one of the most detrimental things that you can do for the river. A lot of your native riverine fishes cannot handle a lot of sediment in the water. So basically, they can't handle dirt. They can't handle sand. These things are evolved and made to basically live around very clean, clear water with a lot of rocks, but almost no dirt or sediment or of any kind. So this has actually caused a lot of issues for the native species of Texas. Now, there are some other issues with the fact that these things are so big that they outcompete your native algae eaters, like your Plecostomus, which is your central stone rollers. They compete against like your red horse, things like that, your river carp sucker. They have a lot of negative effects to the environment, and there's honestly not really any positive to them. People think that the algae growth is a very bad thing in water. Algae growth is a natural occurrence. Yes, it can be exceeded, but usually it's necessary. A little bit of algae growth is actually necessary. Now, another thing about these is they are a facultative air breather. So facultative air breathing means that you have two options on with fish for air breathing. You have obligatory, like the alligator gar, one of the very first Fish Fridays we ever did. It was we did alligator gar, which is an obligatory air breather, meaning that it has to have access to air for it to breathe. A facultative air breather means that it can survive either or. It doesn't need air. So when you get super hypoxic conditions, which these fish are very native to, actually, the Amazon rainforest goes through very seasonal periods of extremely low oxygen content in the water. They have a lot of specialized organs, their swim bladder, their stomach actually, so they can go up and basically eat air, but their stomach has a ton of capillaries surrounding the stomachs and allows it to basically absorb oxygen through the stomach, which is actually really important as well, because when they are eating plants, there's actually a little bit of oxygen released in the digestive process. So, yeah. Now they do have mouth. Their mouth is what they use to hold themselves in rivers. But remember, we talked about the spines. These spines have so many uses. The spines are released as well. You basically use them as a pry bar to hold themselves against rocks. Well, thank you guys so much again. I really hope you're appreciating it. I hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Listen, guys, take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you do, I would really appreciate it. Take care of yourselves again.